We are back with another episode. Today we got somebody who's doing incredible work down at a place called Public Citizen. You can check them out, citizen.org. They are always covering money in politics, corruption, corporate malfeasance. I don't know. You do everything. You're just watching corporations and giving them the stink eye, which we need more of. We have Bitsy. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Chris?
I'm pretty good. I got my gin here. I got my notepad. I feel okay.
Good. You know, it's a great day to talk about corporate power and how we need to crack down on it and completely change the system to work for working people, to work for the public. It's a great day for that on this last Friday in September.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, it's a good day every day to talk about that because these a-holes, pardon my French, don't know when to say no more. They just keep, they're like some kind of pig that can't stop eating. It's just
right.
So I'll start off, obviously this corporate money through lobbying and stuff, it influences our elections and they spend way more than we could possibly spend as individuals. What are some examples of how corporations are influencing our laws? And what about the regulations that are hurting us? There's, I should say, deregulation.
Right.
What's going on with that? Tell people a little bit about that.
Sure, Chris. So, I'm going to start off by saying, corporations, they're kind of an ironic bunch, I think, because the saying in business is the customer's always right. Right? That's what corporations like to say. But then it's like, wait a minute, if the customer's always right, why are corporations, inserting themselves into our government and trying to roll back, protections for the public? If the customer's always right, why are corporations trying to hurt their customers, just everyday people? So that's really what's going on here and what it's all about. So we have a system in America, a regulatory system that is inherently pro-corporate and anti-public interest. Mm-hmm. So I can talk a little more about that. So I think a great, starting place for this is to talk about, what happened under, I would say, the most deregulatory administration of all, the Trump administration, and how the corporate special interests just infiltrated our government, especially our agencies. So I have some examples here. I've got a little notebook I put together, just some examples to kind of give you, a good idea of the deregulatory landscape. There's no better example of deregulation than Donald Trump. And, it makes sense because he's a businessman. I use that term very loosely, businessman, because he was a very bad businessman, but he was a businessman nonetheless. And he ran the country, like one of his corrupt, sham businesses. He ran it like the Trump organization. So first of all, it makes sense that Donald Trump had such a deregulatory agenda and deregulatory administration because many of the agency heads and officials under Trump, they came straight from the industries that they were supposed to regulate, and they all had these corporate connections. So I'll list off a few. I'll start with Vice President Mike Pence. He was connected with Koch Industries. I'm sure you know Koch Industries, horrible, boo, boo. Koch Industries, Chris. Then we had Attorney General Bill Barr, who had corporate connections with AT&T, Verizon, Dominion Energy, and he's the Attorney General of the United States, and he has all these corporate connections. So you can imagine, what that did to, his decision making and how he, ran his business. Then we had the Secretary of the Interior, David Bernhardt, and the Department of the Interior. They're responsible for, protecting federal lands. They have connections with, ensuring the health of our federal lands, the environment, but he was a former lobbyist and lawyer representing mining, oil, and other extraction industries.
Damn it.
I know, Cobalt International Energy. So he has connections to the energy industry. So how do we think that's, affecting, the deregulatory agenda he's got going on at the Department of the Interior?
Yeah.
That's not great. That's not helping working people. And I can go on and on. I'll just give a few more examples. We had Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, and she worked for an international shipping firm. And then Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, maybe you remember him. Mm-hmm. He worked at Goldman Sachs for 17 years and a bunch of other financial organizations. And then we had the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, who was the president of a huge pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly and Company. And so all these people during the Trump administration were working every day to undermine public protections in favor of corporate interests and what they wanted. So that kind of gives you a bit of a lay of the land of how, this goes into a greater concept called corporate capture, which is when, this is a very, pretty obvious example of how that can happen when you have the heads of these agencies coming from the industries that they're supposed to be regulating. So they have competing interests. But corporate capture is also when, agencies are so in contact, just by the nature of their work, they have to work with the industries they're regulating. And, as a result of, working with, for example, a pharmaceutical company every day, that agency's interests over time are going to become aligned with the interests of the pharmaceutical company, that they're trying to regulate. And that's what's called corporate capture. It's when, the agency is no longer acting independently. It is, it's become captured. It's kind of like, when you start hanging out with your friends and you start to talk like that, maybe take on some of their mannerisms. Well, that's what's happening at these agencies. But, this isn't about you and your friends. This is people who are actively working to, undermine like our interests and the public interest because they're just interacting with these companies all the time and, granting their wishes. Mm-hmm. So I can talk a little more about wish granting too and how that happened under the Trump administration.
I want to iterate to people that what she was talking about is the revolving door effect. And it's where people go from the corporate world into the public sector and they are in charge of legislation and stuff like that. And then they come back and forth. Almost, it's not even a thing. Most people do it.
Right.
And there's a huge conflict of interest that maybe people, if you're smart enough to go look into. That's all. Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge issue. So speaking of granting wishes and that sort of, revolving door and influence that is so prevalent in our federal agencies, back in, again, I'm going to use the Trump administration, continue that example because they're just such a great example. They did so much bad. And this is a great way to kind of illustrate, what's really happening here. So the National Association of Manufacturers, they reached out to the Trump administration with a wish list. The National Association of Manufacturers, they're a huge trade association. And in this wish list, they named 132 regulations that concerned them. And they detailed their preferred course of action to address, all these regulations on their wish list. So here's this trade association saying, hey, Trump, I want your agencies to do, what's in our best interest as the National Association of Manufacturers. It's so corrupt, but this is what can happen, especially when you have, deregulatory federal officials, whether it's the president or, the head of an agency. And they were at the agencies were actually under the Trump administration. They were responsive to 85% of the items on NAM's wish list. And I will give you a few examples of how the Trump administration's agencies, just granted NAM's wishes. So one big example is the Council on Environmental Quality. That's a White House office that's responsible for making sure the federal agencies meet NEPA requirements. And NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. And that's an environmental law. It's huge that says that the federal government should evaluate the environmental impact of federally licensed projects and solicit public comment before moving forward with any project. They have to get comments from the public, take them into consideration before,
Makes sense.
Moving forward, which makes sense because the public should have a say in how, something that affects like the environment and where they live, is going to have an impact on them. But the National Association of Manufacturers didn't like how in 2016, Obama's Council on Environmental Quality, and that's a White House office that's responsible for making sure that federal agencies meet the NEPA law requirements. Obama's Council on Environmental Quality, they recommended that agencies attempt to quantify the effect that, an environmental project would have on greenhouse gas emissions. But the National Association of Manufacturers, Chris, they didn't like this guidance, and they asked that the Trump's Council on Environmental Quality replace the policy with one that does not allow unnecessary project delays. So then again, that's an example of how, industry has so much influence to the point where they can influence, the White House's policy making in a way that, directly, benefits them and their interests, and just completely, looks past how projects are going to impact, everyday people on the ground in these communities, because they're the ones who are really being harmed. The corporations just want to, make a buck. They're not the ones who are truly feeling, the effects of these decisions.
And these politicians are doing favors for these corporations, and in turn, they're getting either donations in their campaigns, or who knows, money under the table, or just power in general, to where it's like, all right, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And eventually you have this kind of inner sanctum relationship of powerful elites who take over your country. And of course, people should know that lobbying outweighs, when it comes to spending, corporations exponentially outweigh you as an individual, as a neighborhood, towns, whatever. And so in that turn, they do what they want. When they write the legislation, they give it to the politicians. The politicians just, what do they call that?
Like a rubber stamp.
Rubber stamp. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. And then they send it on. And they've been caught several times having something that was verbatim, came from this company, went through the thing. And the guy was just like, yeah, basically that. And is that the kind of world you guys want to live in? Because it's not the way it used to be, or at least the idea of democracy. So,
right.
So how did you get started with these guys, and where did you go to law school? And what made you want to start even in law school, did you think? And when did you say, you know what, this isn't right?
Sure, Chris. So, I've been interested in, the role we as everyday people can play in our democracy for a long, long time. I would say even going back to my childhood, I was raised, in a working class, democratic household where, I was raised to believe that my voice, as a human being mattered, and that I shouldn't be afraid to raise my voice when I think something is wrong. And those are values that have carried with me, throughout my life. I think my earliest example of my sort of engagement, with, this sort of rulemaking, regulatory type, world that I'm now working in, was in high school. And I'll keep this brief because this was a decade ago. But this is really what made me want to go to law school and pursue work, in the public interest. So my junior year of high school, they amended the dress code to prohibit sleeveless attire, which I thought was just completely sexist. And it made me feel like, my body, was a distraction to boys in class. That's what the school administration believed, that, a girl's bare arms were distraction to boys. They need to cover up. And on the first day of school, I was wearing, a cap sleeve top. It wasn't quite sleeveless. So I was still within the dress code. I was still abiding by their regulations, but my backpack straps pushed it up. So it looked like it was sleeveless. My principal pulled me aside and told me to be prepared to be stopped by other teachers. And I remember the whole day just being afraid I'd get in trouble. And I felt just like really insecure. And I've always loved learning and I've loved school, and to be made to feel like, my body was a distraction and that I was just worried about what I was wearing all day instead of focusing on whatever lesson was being taught in class. It was just ridiculous. And so I got home and I took to Facebook and I created the Right to Bear, BARE, arms campaign, a little play on the Second Amendment, a little pun there. And it was my first experience, with grassroots organizing. I created petitions that I passed around with the help of some volunteers in the lunchroom, as well as an online petition to reinstate sleeveless clothing at my New Hampshire public high school. And that was a really eye-opening and incredible and really formative experience for me. I spoke before the school board about the importance of, allowing sleeveless clothing so, girls can be comfortable. Our school didn't have a lot of air conditioning. And I made like a trifold poster presentation with sleeveless role models like Michelle Obama, Taylor Swift, these women who are doing incredible things and, they're showing their arms. Why can't we do that too in high school? So that was my first experience of engaging with, rules and regulations at the high school local level. Yeah. But, they say, all politics is local. And that made me so passionate to, want to go to law school and keep, fighting for, the people and standing up for what I, felt was wrong.
So how did it turn out? Did you win?
Well, I wrote an amendment to the dress code to bring back sleeveless clothing. They didn't institute that in the time I was there. And I recently, because for my law school, it was like my dissertation, I wrote about the constitutionality of high school dress codes. And I ended up kind of using my high school as, an example. And I went back and looked at their high school dress code now, and it hasn't really changed that much. It's a little vague. It says tank tops aren't allowed, but it's like, what's the difference between a tank top and a sleeveless shirt? So maybe they'll allow something with a thicker strap now. Very vague, quite congressional, since we know many laws are written to kind of vague. So I thought that was really interesting, but it definitely, made a difference. And I think it showed, the importance of, standing up for yourself, like no matter like how old you are. I was in high school, but it just shows, the power of the people's voice. It got people talking. I was in the Boston Globe. There's an article out there. You can look it up. So it was a really, really unique and like I said, a really formative experience, that showed me the power of, the people's voices like coming together when they feel like something's wrong.
Did you ever learn any history or in growing up and stuff that also showed you instances where people were speaking truth to power and things like this?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, the civil rights movement, all the protests involved with the sitting in, the sit-ins with the lunch counters and all those sorts of things, really powerful examples as well. There have just been so many movements, the labor movement,
right?
Fighting for, workers' rights, for unionization. They're just...
A lot of people forgot that happened and we lost a lot of those workers' rights. And it's about time we kind of go back that direction.
I agree. Yeah.
So what else does this organization do that you're a part of now, which is called Public Citizen?
Public Citizen, yes.
And it's at citizen.org. Check it out. What's in a nutshell, what do you guys do?
Sure. So like I said, our MO is all about standing up for corporate power and, fighting for the people and, the interests of the public. So we do a lot of work. I'm in Congress Watch, and I do regulatory policy, like I said, but there are a lot of people who work on issues related to, democracy, making sure people have, fair access to, elections and voting. There's, Access to Medicines group who focuses on, health policy related issues. Then there's Global Trade Watch related to, issues with trade. There are just so many different things that we do, a whole host of things.
How many people are in the organization?
I think about 100, give or take. Yeah.
And do you guys just take donations, or how do you, is it a secret? How do you get funded? And is it hard to get funding when you're against business so much?
Well, we have a lot of supporters. I believe we have over 500,000 supporters. So
wow.
People believe in our mission. They'll send in donations, which is really great. And then we also get, grants to fund a lot of our work that we're doing too. So people can actually care about it. If people want to fight the corporate monstrosity we're against, they can actually go to your website and figure out how to donate directly to you, right? Absolutely. You can donate. You can sign petitions. We're posting petitions all the time.
If you're broke, you just sign the petition too. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just sign the petition because, not everybody has money. Look at the economy we're living in.
Less and less.
Yeah, it's about the money you have. You can, use your voice and your power in other ways.
All right. Well, that's good because we need to do something. And so how do I got to ask you in these days of increasingly unhinged, unpredictable chaos and destruction, how do you stay calm and what do you do to relax?
How do I stay calm and what do I do to relax? Well, I'm a big fan of watching TV.
That always helps.
I love TV.
That helps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I like to read, taking a break from the screens, especially taking a break from the news. I love to, play my ukulele.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love music. I love art. I'll paint, I'll draw, take walks, go hiking, get out in nature. Yeah.
That's right up my alley. I think that's the only thing I always ask people on the show. I say, what gets you? And it's either music or looking at a bird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand. But, so when you're studying this connection between these politicians and these corporations, what's one of the most egregious things that you've found out? What's the one thing that really irks you that you think, I hate this guy or girl? What was the most surprising or like one of the worst personalities, where you're like, I just don't like that guy? Who's your arch nemesis?
Yeah, well, I guess I can't really speak as much to the politicians, but I can talk a bit more about, how agencies kind of create problems. And there's also a specific White House office, that honestly delays a lot of public protection. So I can talk a little bit about, OIRA. It's the most important office in government that you've never heard of, as the saying goes. And OIRA stands for the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. It's located within OMB, the Office of Management and Budget in the White House.
Okay.
And this is an inherently anti-regulatory office. It was created in 1980, no surprise, by President Ronald Reagan. And, I'm going to use another corporate moniker here, boo. Smucker's motto is, with a name like Smucker's, it has to be good. But I think when it comes to Ronald Reagan, with a name like Reagan, it has to be bad. So OIRA, they don't do the best work when it comes to pushing out regulations that agencies have drafted or finalized, that are good for the public. So OIRA is tasked with reviewing drafts of proposed and final federal agency regulations. And oftentimes this is a place where, regulations go to die. And the example I'll use here to kind of describe this is, Ben and Jerry's, I don't know if you've been on the factory tour, but they have a flavored graveyard where they put little gravestones for all the ice cream flavors that they've discontinued. And, I think OIRA would really benefit from a regulatory graveyard. Maybe put it in near the Rose Garden at the White House so people can see, all the regulations that have died under OIRA. Because what happens at OIRA is either, they'll review a regulation and they'll say, okay, this regulation is good to go. Or they'll delay the regulation. And when regulations are delayed, who knows how long it'll be until that regulation sees the light of day. Or like I said, a regulation will just die and we'll never see it. And then something else that happens when rules are being considered at OIRA is they'll look at the cost benefit analysis of the rule. Agencies are required for economically significant rules. And that's just a fancy way of saying the big ticket items that protect, public health, our environment, clean air, clean water. Well, these agencies have to do something for every rule that they write called a cost benefit analysis, which is an assessment and a quantification and a monetization of the benefits and costs of the proposed rule and, the alternatives to regulation. And cost benefit analysis, it's very outdated because it asks agencies to quantify things like, the value of having a clean air to breathe or clean water or welfare. And I'll use another corporate moniker here. So do you remember the old MasterCard ads? They would list some things and say, priceless.
Right.
There are some things that money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Well, if we're talking about I'll use clean air as an example. If I were to do a MasterCard ad, that was anti this cost benefit analysis, it would be something like cost of visit to the emergency room because, you're having trouble breathing, X dollars, cost of an asthma inhaler because now you have, asthma due to breathing in all this smog that's coming from, coal production. X dollars, clean air, priceless. There are some things that cost benefit analysis can't quantify. So that's my little take on that MasterCard ad, just to kind of show you how, there's so much that's involved in, the regulatory process, writing rules that is just anti, public interest and is all about the almighty dollar and what corporations want. Yeah. That's a big issue.
You got a great point there. And then what happens is we move away from politics altogether and we realize this is a philosophical question that we have to ask ourselves about. Exactly. What nature is really worth when we have to stop and look and see, the environment's a thing that we could actually lose, or that these resources that we're constantly taking are finite. But we've never thought like that. And so we're just now, we're either going to have to learn or we're going to pay the ultimate price.
Right.
And that's where
there's hope though. Can I tell you why we have
Please. Hope? I need all I can get.
Yes. So this is a good thing. So right now in the U.S. House of Representatives, there's a bill called the Stop Corporate Capture Act, H.R. 6107. It was introduced by Rep. Pramila Jayapal of Washington. It's currently in the House Judiciary Committee. And that bill would crack down on corporate domination of the rulemaking process and, prioritize, public interests, in the rulemaking process instead. So that's a great bill. And that's, that gives us hope that, we can have a rulemaking process that, protects the public, make sure that we're putting out, good rules, not deregulatory ones. Because it's such a myth that, regulations are bad. That's what we're told, that the administrative state's a problem, that we shouldn't be regulating industry. When the truth is, regulations are good, and they're necessary, and we need to be protecting the public, because this is something Public Citizen says, corporations have their lobbyists. We need to be, advocating for, what's good, advocating for the people. And that's what the Stop Corporate Capture Act does. And I could go on more about it.
How can people get involved with that, in passing that? Should they phone their congressman, or how does that work?
Yeah. Write or, phone, your congressperson and express your support. Absolutely. Say that you believe in, public safeguards that are strong and protect the public, not that, benefit corporations, and that you support the Stop Corporate Capture Act.
All right. There you go. We're doing whatever we can. Always. We can't stop fighting now, people. We really got to wake up and get smart.
Absolutely.
Well, we've run our 30 minutes. I'll stop this thing and we'll talk after. And is there anything else you wanted to mention before we go?
Just, we got to stick together. We got to be fighting the corporate power. Our power as, people is so influential. And I think that's why, corporations are so afraid, because they know the power we have, and, they just try and fight it with money and special interests. That's all they're doing. I have faith that things, will get better, and that we can, eventually overcome, the hold that corporations have on, our government and our political system. I really think we can do it.
All right. I hope you're right. We need all the hope we can get. All right. I want to thank Bitsy for coming on. She's going to come on again, maybe November. We'll bother her again. We'll make it fun.
Sounds good, Chris.
All right. Take it easy. Bye, everybody.
Bye.